This is an interview at Division of Military Naval Affairs Headquarters, Latham, New York, October 31st, 2003, approximately 9:30 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. What is your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
My name is Ross LeBlanc. I was born in Portland, Maine on August 25th, 1948.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I graduated from high school.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
Why did you select the Marine Corps?
A friend of mine he's going to be drafted into the Army, like in April of the year I graduated. He decided that if he went in the Marine Corps, he could delay entry until the summertime in August. So when summertime arrived, I had absolutely no plans as far as my future goes. So he said to me, "Why don't we join the Marine Corps, go in as the buddy plan?" Being naive, not having a clue what I wanted to do with my life, I said sure. I was 17 and I got my mother to sign the papers. That's essentially why I went in and why I went in the Marine Corps.
Okay. When did you go in?
August, it's either the 17th or the 16th of 66.
Okay. Where did you go for your basic?
Paris Island.
Could you tell us about your basic training, how long, and some of the things?
Yeah, it was 8 weeks. I knew I was in for a different experience when the bus pulled up to the station. The drill instructor came onto the bus, and his demeanor, I knew I was in for a different time. Getting off of the bus, it seemed like it was early in the morning. I can remember smelling the swamps around Paris Island. It was an odd smell that I'll never forget. Boot camp was tough. I immediately learned to follow orders. I probably went into service with a bit of a chip on my shoulder because I had a lot of freedom when I was a kid, and I was kind of used to doing things my way. Very quickly, within a matter of days, I realized that was not the case. I found it to be, I suppose probably after the first week or so, I began to get into a routine that I was comfortable with. And a couple of times in boot camp, you get a little nervous that you're not going to pass certain tests. And so you get a little anxious, if you will. Probably one of the places where I nearly failed in boot camp was when you had to jump into the pool with your fatigues and boots on, and you have to tread water for whatever it was, 5 or 10 minutes. I had a very difficult time with that. Turns out later on in life I figured out that my bones are dense, and therefore I sink rather readily. So being nervous about flunking that test, because in boot camp you don't flunk tests, I figured out a way to simply get some air, go underwater for about a foot or so, tread water, keep coming up, and that's how I passed that, because I just didn't have the stamina to keep myself afloat. 20 years later, when I got into scuba diving, I figured it out. I didn't need weights. Everybody else needed weights. So, but graduating from Paris Island made you feel good. I must say the spirit de corps, however they do it to you, it became ingrained. And so it was an interesting experience when I went to the advanced training at Camp Lejeune, and I can't remember the name of the advanced training location for 6 weeks. That was rougher. I think you got out of Paris Island figuring that the worst is over. Just started. And I found that the Camp Lejeune training was more difficult. They mess with your sleep. You're constantly running around, going on maneuvers. They were training you for Vietnam, and I'll tell you, even though when I got my orders for Vietnam in Paris Island, I must say I was stunned. I couldn't believe I was going to Nam, and yet how naive of me to not realize that. But again, since I simply joined to be with my buddy on the buddy plan, I never even contemplated going overseas. I was absolutely floored.
Did you stay with him?
No, he I think in the span of after we got out of Paris Island, we saw each other 3 days in 2 years. He went into supply and logistics, and I became a grunt. I think I may have when I came home from Lejeune, we saw each other for 3 days, where he got home sooner, we overlapped, and then he went back to probably Camp Lejeune, and then I went out to Camp Pendleton.
Did he ever go to Vietnam?
I think he may have been there for a couple of days. I think the closest he got was Okinawa, and I think during that time we were in, his father had died, and then his grandfather had died. He was only son. That may have been a contributing factor to change him from being a grunt into supplies. So no, the buddy plan was a fallacy in our case.
After Lejeune, where did you go?
Went home for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I went out to Camp Pendleton for jungle training. That was interesting. It was my first time in California, and I arrived, it must have been just before the holidays. And I'll never forget it because I expected Southern California to be warm and sunny. I got to the beach at Oceanside and looked out and saw everybody surfboarding in wetsuits. I was a little confused about that. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And it turns out I didn't realize the currents come from Alaska coming down, therefore it's much colder as opposed to Florida going the other way. And then, so we're at Pendleton, and that wasn't too bad. It was easier than Camp Lejeune. But I must say it was cold. We went out on some maneuvers at night, and it was snowing. I'm thinking, what is going on with the weather in Southern California? But it wasn't too bad. I felt it easier than Camp Lejeune. So I think we were there about 4 weeks, and then we caught a plane to Okinawa.
Now, were you assigned to a unit, or did you go as a replacement?
It turns out it was a replacement. In the beginning, I couldn't tell. They're kind of herding you like cattle, if
Well,
you will.
you went into the rotation system anyhow.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. When did you arrive in Vietnam?
Probably about, I think I was in Okinawa for about 3 days. And then I landed, then we took off and I landed in Da Nang. So that was probably around January 17th of 67, someplace in that time frame.
Okay.
Then probably a day or two later, I caught probably a C-130 or C-123, whatever was flying at that time, up to Phu-Bai. And I stayed there for probably a week or 10 days. I'll never forget when I landed at Nam, I kept looking out the window and looking for bullets and mortars, and all hell to break loose. And being in Da Nang, and even at Phu-Bai, there were big bases, especially Da Nang. And so you had no concept that you were there. You know, to me, it just looked like what a military installation would look like overseas in any part of the world. So I think I was at Phu-Bai a good 2 weeks. It was like they didn't know what to do with you because I wasn't really doing much of anything. You know, they put you up in these wooden, what do they call them?
They're two-story barracks.
Yeah.
I was there too.
Okay, yeah. And I can remember, all I can remember was coming out on the steps, and it had been raining, and immediately walking in mud, you know, probably halfway up your knees. That I remember distinctly. But aside from that, you know, it was kind of the usual so many times in the service, hurry up and wait, and you're bored to tears. And it wasn't like I was looking for action, but it was boring because it was clear they didn't know what to do with you yet. So you're just kind of waiting. And then finally I got orders for Khe Sanh. I can't even remember, I probably flew, yeah, I must have, I think we flew into Khe Sanh. And when I landed, I was put into an attached security platoon, and we were attached to Bravo 19, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. And I'll never forget my first night. When I arrived at Khe Sanh, it was like a metal airstrip that they had put together, and the side of the base that I was on, I remember there was a foxhole, and there was elephant grass 2 feet in front of me. No concertina wire, absolutely nothing. And I think that first night, there was no moon. And I must say, that was a nervous night. being over there and knowing that you're guarding a base, and yet there's absolutely nothing in front of you. And I'd never heard of Khe Sanh, so to me it was like, okay, I've arrived. That was how I got to Vietnam, and then eventually up to Khe Sanh. From there, we began to, we knew we were a security platoon, and we were attached to Bravo 19, which obviously was a regular outfit there. It was unclear what our role was. We were kind of treated as, I wouldn't say second-class citizens, but we were probably just a hodgepodge group of Marines who were assigned there. We began to, put together defensive positions around the base. I can remember putting up concertina wire. Never forget one of the days I was doing that. And I had my helmet off, and it was sunnier than hell, and I got the most wicked sunburn I've ever had in my life. And needless to say, when I had to put that helmet back on, it felt like it weighed about a ton, and it hurt. And everyone just laughed at me and just said, "You better not take that helmet off. Otherwise dereliction of, rule, whatever it is." And then I remember we started going out on patrols. And in the beginning, the first couple of months, relatively quiet. Rarely did you see anybody. Occasionally we would see what turned out to be mountain yard villagers, occasional. You'd hear some sporadic activity going on with some of the long-range reconnaissance teams that would go out the force recon. And I don't know, that must have gone on for maybe a month or two. And then sometime around April or May of '67, all of a sudden there began to be some more contacts that were going on. And I think it was primarily either the force recon or some of the normal units of Bravo 19. I can remember going out on patrol probably a week or so prior to the first Battle of Khe Sanh. And I remember seeing some villagers, though, but you could tell they look like, well, let's put it this way, they look like civilians because all they had on was, in my mind, it looked like loincloths, but they were all fairly young, like 18 to 22, reasonably good shape. A couple of them I remember being about 6 foot. And the more experienced Marines, I remember them stopping them and talking to them, and they were carrying some logs on their shoulders. So I suppose one would think that perhaps they were building, in some of the villages. And the experienced Marines let them pass. Then all of a sudden, somebody in the squad decided that something wasn't quite right. They ran back to where those, I'll say, 6 or 8 Orientals were carrying those logs. The logs had been dropped in the trail, and they had run away. Obviously, they were, as it turns out, North Vietnamese regulars, and they were probably, and who knows, they could have had a Chinese advisor with them because they were big guys. And so obviously they then figured out that they weren't villagers, and so you kind of knew something was going on, but again, no big heavy fighting going on. And then maybe a week or two later, all hell broke loose. There were I don't know what size outfit was out there in Bravo 19, but a squad, a platoon, they got ambushed probably around either Hill 881 or 861, north-south. There's a couple of them that were up there. And they took a lot of casualties. And I can remember the base being mobilized and seeing the regulars of Bravo 19 just take off and go out towards the hills. And the security platoon that I was left behind, and we had to sprint thin around the base because we were the only perimeter protection at that point in time. Within just a few hours, I mean, you could hear all kinds of fighting going on, airstrikes, mortars, artillery, you name it. And then shortly, C-130s began to land. And they would land, and I can remember the doors opening up of the cargo ships. They would come down, Marines would be running out that back and then running out the gate, and it must have been 10 or 20 of them, it seems, in the space of a day or two. They kept landing. The casualties was phenomenal. I didn't have to go out there, thank God, because the casualty rate of Bravo 19 was, I don't know, 60, 70, 80%. It was big. And I'll never forget, and I put this in a context of the recent war. In the first part, we lost like 120 soldiers in Iraq, and since then we've lost about another 120, whatever the number is. I can remember during those days walking across the airstrip and past this big container, and the container was maybe, I don't know, maybe 20 feet by 10 feet deep. It was open, and all I saw was body bags. And I bet I saw more body bags than what we lost in the first part of the Iraq War, just right in front of my eyes in the space of a couple of days. And of course, at that time, we've already lost, I don't know how many thousands by that point, in 67, 10, 15,000, I don't know what the number was at that point. But, and now when I think about Iraq and I just remember back, it puts body count in a different perspective. And so it was an eye-opening experience. So in any event, choppers were landing everywhere. I mean, the rotor blades were touching one another. I mean, I can remember over our hutch having the blades, right above my head because they had to park them so close. As it turns out, when I got out of the service and I read up on it, they had said that Khe Sanh is on a plateau, and the North Vietnamese, what they planned on doing was overrunning the base. And they figured that if they'd had another 3 to 4 weeks of not being found, they would have been in a position to overrun the base. So that was, I shouldn't be here just from that first round, if you will. So probably a month or two later, you remember then going out on more patrols. It was much quieter. Nothing was really going on. Then I remember being assigned, I can't remember. It was probably after the initial battles. Across the, we're on the plateau, and then it was a big valley, and it was a river. And then you had some high mountains, and they had an observation post on top of that mountain. Being stationed up there for a week or so, it was nice. You were away from everything. It was very pretty, beautiful looking out, no matter if you're looking at Laos or North Vietnam. And I always remember that because it was so pretty. And then when you look at photographs from after the second Battle of Khe Sanh, when they literally bombed every square inch of that whole area and probably used defoliants, it looked like the face of the moon. And it was kind of a striking reminder as to what warfare can do to just the beauty of land, much less all the people who are killed. But so I was probably at Khe Sanh for 3 months. Then I got transferred to India 3-3, and that was at the Rock Pile, Razorback, and also fairly close to Cam Low. So now this is a regular ground outfit. I may have been transferred with a couple of guys to India 3-3, but I really can't remember. I began to realize even back then, don't make close friends because you don't know how long people are going to be there. But when I got to I-33, I did get tight with some people, squad leader, and several of the guys in my squad. At that point, I think I was a Lance Corporal. No, PFC probably. And then a Lance Corporal. A few months later, I became not a squad, what's a smaller, 4 guys, fire team, whatever, fire team leader or something. And initially, with India, it wasn't too bad. We'd go on operations around the Razorback. It was different topography. It was interesting. And I can remember spending time on top of the rock pile. Apparently, they built a helipad on top of it. And it was kind of like a mini rocket Gibraltar. It was interesting because being up there when you're running guard duty, you're kind of lackadaisical because you figured nobody could climb up this. Of course they could. But you had like baboons and all kinds of jungle type animals around. It was an interesting place. went on a number of patrols, and not too much activity. Occasionally, some of the different companies would run into some resistance, but nothing I felt that dramatic. I began to, I began to learn a little bit more now as far as how to survive. The one thing that was very striking to me is how ill-prepared I was at training. When I was in boot camp, again, I didn't dream about going to Nam. I won't say I didn't pay attention, but the training was so quick and so superficial at times, probably because they're just trying to get Marines, through boot camp as quick as possible and get them overseas. When I got there, I realized how unprepared I was, and it wasn't until I became a squad leader when I really realized how unprepared I was, just reading a map. And of course, years later, realizing I have a terrible sense of direction, and just having a compass. And sure would be nice to have the GPS systems you have today. But again, I realizing that the training was really not that good. I mean, at that time, I'm 18 years old, and I'm starting to influence people's lives, and I'm still a kid. And then probably the next big event for me was September 7th of '67. We were back in our base camp. We had just received, a few days beforehand, literally, we received the M16, which was interesting because I had seen not only the Army with the M16s, I had seen some Special Forces South Vietnamese soldiers with M16s, and we were still carting around the M14. That was always interesting to me that, okay, the Army's got them, you can understand. The South Vietnamese have them, we don't. What's wrong with this picture? And I remember when we got the M16, it was such a relief because I could carry twice as much ammo. I could carry it, one arm, and you could easily maneuver it. It was lighter, faster, the whole bit. Well, needless to say, about 3 days later, one of the companies ran into a lot of problem. They were being ambushed, so they wanted us to come out to help them out. So when we left, we decided rather than go down Route 9, which is a road that eventually would lead you to Khe Sanh, we decided not to take the road because we figured we'd get ambushed. So we were going through the boonies, through the brush, and we were getting no place fast. It was hotter than hell. You're cutting through the grass, and you're getting cut, and you're going like tortoises. So we said, the hell with it, let's get out on the road. So when we got out on the road, I was the number 2 person in the column. And maybe we had walked a couple hundred yards. And I don't know what happened, but the guy who was the point, he said his rifle wasn't working properly, which we all heard the rumors about how easily they jam. I don't remember him firing it, so I don't know why or how he could recognize that his rifle wasn't working. Needless to say, I then became number 1 person. Well, my heart rate went up about 10,000% at that point, since I figured that pretty soon we're going to run into something, and I guess I'm going to get it first. So, we're walking down the road, and you stagger. I was on to the right-hand side of the road, and off to the left, there was a big group of bushes, and there was a big hill that went up. And all of a sudden, I heard a noise in the bushes. I don't know if it was a click, who knows. But I immediately opened up with my M16, and shortly thereafterwards, a Chi-Com was thrown at me. And by the time I saw it, it was probably a third of the way towards me. And so when I looked at it, my reaction was, well, I cannot run it, it's coming at me. So I decided to run at it, figuring maybe if I can get past it before it explodes. It literally went between my legs, and it must have been a dud because there was no explosion. Now I'm on the same side of the road as the bushes and the gooks are on. And whether it was nerves, whether it was dust, but I was having a real hard time getting the next new round of bullets into that M16. probably unfamiliarity with the weapons, since I only had a matter of days, but it sure wasn't working right. Finally, at what seemed like several minutes, probably was many seconds, I got it working properly, fired off probably another magazine or two, and of course you couldn't see anything. And now all of a sudden you're hearing explosions all around you. And then it quieted down. I remember pulling back because I was totally exposed, where I was, you had the bushes maybe, 50 feet in front of you. There was absolutely nothing but barren ground, so I had nothing to hide behind. So I remember pulling back. I remember a tank coming up and just blowing the hell out of those bushes. And then the officer in charge decided to get us up on a line, and we were going to simply go up this big hill, figuring that we're going to flush out the, which we assumed to be NVA. So we started to march up the hill, and I can remember the elephant grass being nearly waist high, so it was a perfect ambush spot. And all of a sudden, firing started up again. And good, you couldn't see anything. It wasn't like I saw anybody in particular. Even when I saw the bushes before, when we first got ambushed, I could see some flashes, but they were concealed. I don't know, after a minute or two, all of a sudden I got hit in the leg, and I went down. And of course, your initial reaction was, there was really no pain, but my initial reaction with adrenaline is I figured my leg was gone. So I didn't want to look, but obviously I did, and I could see it, and I felt it. Okay, but I knew I'd been hit in the calf here. So then I remember a corpsman coming up, Navy corpsman. They're guardian angels. They did an awful lot. They saved a lot of Marines. They're good. So he threw a bandage on me, and he said, all right, I want you to get out of here. Go back to the rear. You need to be medevaced out of here. So went back down the hill, and all of a sudden we started to get mortared. Because on the other side of Route 9, going up much bigger hills off to the right, you could see the flashes of the tubes, and the mortars were coming down. And of course, you're on a flat road. Again, there's no place to hide from those darn mortars, so just laid on the ground and prayed. And then probably within a few minutes, I can remember the Phantoms coming in, and they napalmed the hell out of that hillside. And boy, that made you feel happy for the Air Force or the Navy or whoever the hell was flying the Phantoms. And so the mortars stopped. I don't know. Fighting was still going on. Then it sort of quieted down. Then, I don't know, I can remember being put on a, what do you call it, a 6x, whatever those big trucks were. And those wounded that weren't critical, they drove us back eventually to our base. And, oh yeah, the other thing I can remember, just before we got ambushed on Route 9, we passed some villagers, Montagnards, and they were real Montagnards, you could tell, young kids, older women, the beetle nut smile, your classic, the classic look. And we let them go because we just figured, they're not doing anything. They certainly weren't like the Orientals we had seen when I was at Khe Sanh. When I was driving back on the 6x, they had detained the villagers, probably a half mile down the road. And it was one of those times where you can kind of understand, I'm not going to rationalize what happened at My Lai. But you can understand why sometimes some of the American forces would shoot civilians, because I find it very hard to believe they didn't know what was in store for us. On the other hand, as I think intellectually now, they're between a rock and a hard plate, as all civilians are in combat situations across the world, and they had no choice but it sure made you wonder at the time, but so be it. So in any event, I went back to the base. They patched me up, and then I can remember it got real rainy over the next couple of weeks. Oh, let me finish. At that day, we lost, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 people in my platoon, including my squad leader. And that bothered me a lot because I got too close to him. And that hurt. And it really blew my mind because it was one of those things that he caught a piece of shrapnel in his Achilles tendon, and he died of shock. And intellectually, I was so perplexed. It made absolutely no sense to me how that could possibly happen when you saw other Marines who'd been wounded so severely who would live through it. And of course, at that point in my life, I had no idea what shock was. I found out later. Yeah, losing Sibley was, that was a hard loss for me. And I think after he died, I never got that close to anybody again because I didn't want to go through that. It was too personal. So anyway, got back to the base, patched me up. The rains came and the bandages in my wound began to get infected all the time because it was always moist. They wouldn't let me go out on patrols. Not that I really wanted to, but it was kind of boring just sitting in a foxhole all the time. So when the infection got worse and worse, they finally sent me back to, I went to Dong Ha, then I went to Phu Bai, and then I ended up at Cam Ranh Bay because they were going to do a skin graft down there. And if I thought Da Nang was nice when I arrived in country, Cam Ranh Bay looked like a resort in the middle of the Caribbean. The place was beautiful. And so I did a skin graft. I was there for about a week. After a few days, got done with the operation, and then he says, we'll give you a week of saltwater treatment, which meant go to the beach for a week. And that was nice. So I had a wonderful week of just drinking lots of beer and getting nice and sunburned and relaxing and having hamburgers and hot dogs, and boy, they tasted good. And so then came back, and probably shortly thereafterwards, I think I went on R&R, my first R&R. Went to Hong Kong, and all I wanted to do was eat, drink, be merry, find some women, the typical things that you do when you've been in a grunt situation. And came back, and it made me a squad leader. And that's when I really realized that the training I had was poor. And I'll never forget when they promoted me. I remember he was either a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant, and I'll never forget his face. The first time I saw him after they told me I was going to be a squad leader, he just looked at me and shook his head. And he said, he just said to me, he says, Ross, it's nothing personal, but you don't have a clue what you're going to be doing. And I looked at him, and I didn't disagree with him because the training was just not there. In hindsight now, when you look at Iraq, the difference in the training now, 30 or 40 years later, they finally got their act together, and they make sure that in the military, and if you're going to be in combat, that you have proper training, proper tools. Makes a big difference. So in any event, I became a squad leader, and then we went on numerous patrols, nothing all that big. Then I remember we moved to up along the DMZ, places like Contian, Jialin, other places that if I heard the names, they would bring back memories. And they were, it was A3 or something, I don't know. And some of the locations where they had simply bulldozed, hundreds of yards of earth, so that, they made that big line across the DMZ. And you're in these big bunkers, and I remember going out on patrols there, and you knew the North Vietnamese were around. You could you could smell them because obviously, they didn't take baths, and, you knew they had just been there, or you knew they were within a few hundred feet of you, and they wouldn't do anything, but you couldn't find them. And occasionally there'd be some ambushes, but it'd be sporadic. Then I can remember being up there the first time where we got rocketed. You could tell it was a quantum leap from mortars. These things were big, and they made a lot of noise, and they created quite a crater. So we would have relatively minor skirmishes. I can remember once being, we ran into an ambush, and there were trees, and then little patches of fields, and more trees, and it's kind of a mixed terrain. And I remember I was in the middle of that terrain, probably waist deep, or maybe up to my knees, grass. And then a sniper started to shoot. And it became apparent after about the third shot that I was one of his targets. And it's very nerving when you don't know where the hell the bullets are coming from. And that grass, it may have been knee-high, but I'll tell you, it felt like there was nothing there at all, and I felt like I was naked. Finally, somebody spotted him and probably blew him out of a tree with a grenade launcher or something. But for a while, man, I was hoping I was a mole and I could dig a hole. What else? I can remember one night, don't remember where I was. I was probably pretty close to Geolin, I think. And we had to set up perimeter. One of the things I liked about being a squad leader was that I didn't have to stay up all night. You could catch some Z's, and then, once or twice during the night you get up, you make rounds to make sure everybody's awake and chat with everybody. That night I was lazy, and I decided not to dig a hole. So I found a crater. And I'm not sure if the crater was a rocket crater, a bomb crater, whatever it was. So I decided, I was lazy, I was tired, I was going to spend the night in a crater, and I did. Well, we got mortared like crazy that night, and that crater felt like the Grand Canyon. And I thought to myself, if you live through this, I'm not a real religious person, but I must say I did say a few prayers that night. I will never jump into a pre-made bomb crater again. Dig your own foxhole. It's a lot smaller, and therefore the probability of that thing landing on top of you is a lot less. Unfortunately, we made it through that night, but that was a night of, it lasted for many hours, and it was the kind of thing where when there wasn't any shells coming in, it was very quiet. When they hit and they created casualties, boy, you could hear the screaming, and the guys begging for morphine and whatever it would take, and at that point, for a long time, none of the choppers could come in because, the area was too hot. And I lost a lot of guys that night. But there was really nobody to shoot at because they knew where we were, but we didn't have a clue where they were at. Let's see. What else? Well, then it was, probably around that time, I also traveled around Kamlo, and I saw where at Kamlo is one of the 3 major producing places of marijuana in the country at the time. And you could get it, bags of it, 100 joints for $1. I didn't smoke. A lot of the guys did. And I quickly learned that you can't control everybody all the time. And I began to realize there was a fine line, because if you crossed certain Marines in a certain way, they could get even with you. Because there were, when combat's happening, who knows who's shooting where. I hate to say it, but there were a few rumors of things that took place. So it was the kind of thing where I basically said to the guys, I said, listen, we're out on patrol, don't be stoned. when we're back in the rear, things are quiet, use your judgment.
How prevalent was drug use?
At that time, not a lot. I think where we're at, a lot of grass. There was none of the hard stuff was around, none of the heroin, none of all the ugly stories that you heard a few years later, at least where we were at, but the grass was very prevalent. But to my knowledge, the best I could determine, the guys basically, they didn't smoke when we went on patrol, and they were straight. And I feel pretty confident on that one. Let's see, I was offered, probably about 9 months into my tour, I was offered to be transferred into a CAC position. And, what do you call it, Civil Action Platoon or something, where you'd be in with either the South Vietnamese regulars or with some of the villagers, and you'd be an advisor type of deal. And if I did that, I'd go home for 30 days, and I'd have to extend for maybe 6 months. And I was only in for 2 years, so, I'd only be over there for maybe about 5 more months. I thought about it, because I figured if I can get out of the infantry or the grunt outfit and get into CAC, your probability of being blown away in CAC was a lot less. So I thought about it for a good couple of days, and I decided not to. That was a smart decision, because when I left country, middle of February of '68. I got back to Dong Ha, and all hell broke loose, because that's when the Tet Offensive started. And it was unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Every place in Nam was being hit simultaneously. And I remember we made it down to Da Nang, so I had to go from Dong Ha to Da Nang. And our flight got canceled for all outgoings. Nothing was happening for 24 hours. I thought, my God, I'm going to die now. I can't get out of this goddamn place. And as history unfolded, all those CAC outfits, they were thoroughly annihilated. So there's no question, if I had volunteered for that, I wouldn't be here today. It was a happy day getting on that airplane. Yep, it was a real happy day. It was 100 Christmases rolled into one. And just seeing American stewardesses on a Continental airline, boy, that was nice. So it was, I guess that's kind of a brief history of being over there.
Were you discharged once you went back to the States, or did you have
Now,
time to do
when I came back, went home for 3 weeks, then they sent me back to Camp Lejeune. And as soon as I got back, they approached me, and they said, do you want to work in an office? And I said, why? I don't know. And I said, well, you're reasonably intelligent, and, do you a favor. So I thought, well, what would I be doing if I just stayed where I am? He says, well, you'd be doing maneuvers and, war games. And I'm thinking, you got to be serious. I'm back from Nam, and now I'm going to do war games for 3 to 4 months? You got to be kidding me. What else are we going to do? Well, you have to go around, and, you have to pick up garbage along the streets, cigarette butts. And I said, why? He says, well, we have so many people coming back from Nam, and they're going to be out in 6 months. We don't know what to do with y'all. That sounds interesting. So I said, all right, fine, put me in the office. So I was in the office making dog tags. And probably in about 3 days, I'd never been so bored in my life. And so I went to the sergeant or whoever it was, and I said, listen, this is not for me. And I said, he says, well, what are you talking about? I said, I'm bored. And he said, well, we pulled strings to get you into this job. And I said, hey, you asked me. I mean, I wasn't asking for special favors. Well, it turns out I didn't know about it, but a Silver Star was coming my way. And I guess they just felt that, we'll give you a little something. And since they were doing it for me as a favor, and again, I had no aspirations of college. I had obviously my intelligence wasn't too high, or I wouldn't have gone into the Marine Corps not recognizing I was going to Nam. So I said, well, I'm bored. And they said, well, if you leave the office, we'll send you to Cuba. And he said it in a way as punishment. So I I said, So I asked some of the guys, said, what's going on in Cuba? Guantanamo Bay. What the hell is that? It's a naval base. Didn't know we had been there since the 1890s or some damn time. So what do we do down there? Well, you do perimeter guard. And then so you're on guard one day, you get the next day off. All right, so when I'm off, what can I do? I said, well, you want to skin dive? You want to go to the beach? Movies, beers, you name it. Send me down there. So I got down there probably within a few days, and I had a good time. It was fun. You know, I enjoyed life for once, enjoyed the Caribbean. I tried to stay there to the day I got out because I knew when I came back to North Carolina I'd be doing the same thing. So I guess you normally had to come back within 30 days. I think I begged and pleaded and I came back with 12 days to go. And for those last 12 days I walked around and I picked up cigarette butts. And I thought, and they tried to re-up me. And I said, you got to be kidding me. There's no way. And if you think I want to go back to Nam another time, no. And it was then when I was in Cuba where I decided that I wanted to do something with my life. And I took some correspondence courses and decided to go to college, and that's what I did when I got back through Hudson Valley in a GI Bill. So that was the extent of the service.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Sure.
The comparison between the M14, M16, which did you prefer, or?
Well, if I wanted to hit a target at 500 yards, I definitely want the M14. There's no two ways around it. But the way I looked at it, when you're over there, I mean, Christ, you really have to shoot
within
right feet to 100 feet. So who cares? And the fact that it's so light, and in the rounds you can carry 2 times the amount of ammo. Once they worked out the bugs, there was no question the M16 was the superior weapon. Although, it gets dirty easily, it jammed. God help you if it gets wet. At that time, it was really problematic with the M14. You could throw it in the mud, pick it up, and it still worked fine. But yeah, the M16, that was a good weapon.
How about race relationships?
Relationships?
Within your unit, the blacks and so on?
I went to Guilderland High School. There were 4 blacks in our class. One of them was the vice president of the student council. I didn't know what racism was when I was at Guilderland. My senior year, my parents broke up, and I went to Mount Pleasant, different world, which is now it's combined into Lenton High School. And I don't know what the percentage of blacks was, but it was high. But even there, I didn't really experience the racism thing. It was, when I was in Nam, I don't know, a third. It seemed like the guys around were black, and I felt I established some pretty good rapport with several of them, including one of my fire team leaders when I was a squad leader. But 2 things happened. One was, I'll never forget when I came back and I would commute when I was at Camp Lejeune. This guy would give me a ride from Camp Lejeune to New York. I'd sit at Port Authorities and catch a bus going up. And on one of those weekends, I saw the fire team leader. He was walking down the street with 2 other blacks. So I was, hey, how you doing? And he looked at me like I was nothing. Absolute nothing. And you could have hit me in the face with a 2x4. I thought, whoa, what did I do? And then it seemed like about a month later, Martin Luther King got shot. And the base polarized. It was unbelievable. And for the first time ever, we had to walk in groups. And so I did not experience the racial problem when I was in Nam. Whether, now in hindsight, I wonder just how sincere they were in their relationships with me. I'll never know. On the other hand, when he saw me in New York City, he was with his 2 peers. And I'm sure he would have been ostracized if he had interacted with me, because God knows if they were veterans, who knows. So, it was an interesting experience as far as the racial thing. But over there with me at that time, no problem.
What were your feelings toward the anti-war movement, the anti-war protesters?
I land in California. Where the hell did we land? I can't remember. Some, El Toro? Is that someplace out there? Yeah, I think we landed in El Toro. I can remember going into the terminal, getting off the plane, and seeing some people with placards and yelling and stuff. It struck me as odd. As time went on and the anti-war thing really started to take off when I got back, it bothered me, but because I immediately went into college, I purposely took liberal arts and planned on going to Albany State if I was smart enough, and get into international relations, because one of the things I wanted to do was find out why Vietnam. And I quickly began to realize, and also listening to the media, that I consider myself to be a rather open person, there were beginning to be two sides to the story. I did not condone some of their actions. I will never get over those people who avoided the draft by either having VIPs, lying. You leave country, fine, you leave country. But that dual system of the poor and the uneducated are the ones that had to serve, and then the others who manipulated the system, I will always have a problem with that.
How do you feel about Jane Fonda?
I like her. I really didn't appreciate her, I think, when she went to North Vietnam at that point in time. I thought the sensitivity, that was a bad move. Yeah, I had a hard problem with her in the beginning, for those first year or so. As I matured intellectually, I had a better understanding, but I still don't think going to North Vietnam was a smart move.
You received a Silver Star. Was that for the September 7th, 67?
Yeah, I was given credit for prematurely setting off the ambush, which I suppose is true, because obviously they usually don't want to nail the point. I mean, the point usually has no brains, no responsibility. You want to hit in a core where the officers, the radio, and everything else is. I was credit for, I can't remember, 3 or 4 kills. But to say that I could actually see who I was killing, I was working off of instinct and survival, and it was all reaction stuff. There was no John Wayne that day. No. So I got it primarily for, setting off the ambush prematurely.
Now, you mentioned you did use the GI Bill.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, when Hudson Valley was good. They basically said, we don't care what your marks were in high school. As long as in the second semester, if you can prove that you developed some study habits, we'll keep you. So I had a rough time in the first semester because I never studied in my life. All I want to do is party and have a good time. And when I was in high school, if I need to pass a test, I'd cram at the end. It's just the way that I was. But it got me through. And the GI Bill, they jerked me around 1 year. I'll never forget, I didn't get a check for like about 3 months. And I had gotten married a year after I got out of the service. And I'll never forget calling Sam Stratton to see if he could shake the bureaucracy. And I think when I made the call, it was probably 8 days before Christmas. In 2 days, the check was released. When I was at Khe Sanh, he came over there, and at Khe Sanh. And again, that was not exactly a secure location. And I have a picture with him where there was 4 of us. He was always a friend of the military, and he was true blue.
He was a
And
Marine.
Huh?
He'd been a Marine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you read much about Vietnam, Khe Sanh, and so on? Or?
I read a lot for the first 5 to 10 years. Probably too much. And part of it also is taking international relations courses at Albany State. And then I stopped for a good, if a good movie came out, I would watch it.
What do you consider a good movie in Vietnam?
I think the one that came out about a year or 2 ago with the Ashaw Valley with Mel Gibson.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Platoon was pretty good. Steel Metal Jacket was it brought back too many ugly memories. It was too bloody, too ugly. And, but the Mel Gibson movie probably brought out the most emotionalism I felt in a long time. And I think the embedded reporters with the Iraq invasion that brought back a lot because you're right there and it's live. And it brought back a lot of memories. But then I've done some internet over the last 10 years, and it was weird. One of the people I work with at the hospital, her son interviewed me. That's how I ended up here today. Probably 2 weeks after he interviewed me, I got a phone call out of the blue from a guy who had tracked me down either through this or some other method. He was actually on a lookout on one of the hills overlooking Route 9 when the ambush started. And it was so weird it was like I was looking at a video recorder, if you will, to know someone was actually looking down and seeing what was going on. And his one comment to me, he was scared to death we were going to force the NBA up towards him. And so in talking with him, and I've gone on the internet more. Last Saturday night I saw a photograph that my squad leader took that I'm probably in, but I can't really making out because of the graininess. These are weird things that have now occurred years later or just today. This is very strange.
Have you ever stayed in contact? Did you stay in contact with anyone?
No.
Probably not close enough.
Yeah, after Sibley died, I tried to, I'm a people person, but I recognize that getting too close, it's not worth the heartache. And so I chose not to. I saw a couple guys when I was in Guantanamo. They came in on med cruises. They were Med and Caribbean cruises, and they were in for like 3 and 4 years. So we partied when they came in. But aside from that, no.
What do you think of the rotation system?
It's better than being there for a duration. I'll never forget, the Pueblo was captured halfway through my rotation there. And for 24 hours, we were told basically that if we go to war with North Korea, we're here for the duration. We were very depressed for 24 hours. So I felt that the rotation system made sense, but I think from a continuity perspective, as far as a fighting force, that's not the way you fight a war, because I think it breaks up. You've always got new people coming in, and on the other hand, it's better to get the heck out of there too. So there are pros and cons. So from a personal perspective, do the rotation system.
How do you think your time in service changed or affected your life?
Oh, I realize that I'm on borrowed time, and that's nice. I think I appreciate life a lot more. I think it's made me a more humane, moral person. I've grown up. The experience was relatively positive for me, but I would not recommend it because I don't think if you're going to join the military and be in war, make an informed decision and certainly have better training, but hopefully we can resolve things someday through peaceful means rather than shooting one another.
Okay, and finally, when was that taken?
That was probably taken...
Could you hold it up in front of you, please?
That was probably taken out of boot camp or Paris Island, I would imagine.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your
Okay,
interview.
very good.